This episode is brought to you by the Kirtland Partnership Committee. For 30 years, they've been dedicated to supporting, growing, and preserving the Kirtland National Security Complex. They work tirelessly to enhance military readiness, foster community partnerships, improve quality of life, and promote economic development right here in New Mexico. Join their mission to ensure that Kirtland remains a cornerstone of national security and a key provider of quality jobs and investment for all of Greater Albuquerque. Together, we can make a powerful impact. Kirtland Partnership Committee, proudly shaping the future of our national security for 30 years. As Deb Haaland prepares to step down as Interior Secretary, she sits down with Albuquerque Journal-Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd to reflect on her accomplishments, challenges, and what might lie ahead. And a South Carolina man has pleaded guilty to gunning down a New Mexico State police officer who helped to stop him with a flat tire last year. Journal reporter Matthew Narvaiz joins me to discuss the case and the plea deal. Plus, New Mexico Reentry Center, a nonprofit focused on housing and job placement for formerly incarcerated individuals, is setting up shop in Española. Journal business reporter Matthew Narvaiz has the latest and stops by to tell us all about it. It's Monday, January 20th, 2025. I'm Gino Gutierrez, and I'll have more on those stories, plus a look at the Journal's other headlines and the weather forecast, coming up on the Leading News. After a trailblazing tenure as Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland is ready to return to New Mexico to figure out what the next chapter of her life looks like. She recently sat down with Albuquerque Journal-Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd to discuss what possibilities may lie ahead. Dan joins me now. Thank you so much for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
So Dan, by the time this interview airs, Deb Haaland will be ready to step down as Interior Secretary, but her tenure as leader of the department has been nothing short of historic.
Yeah, I mean, she was the first Native American cabinet secretary when President Biden appointed her to the job in 2021. And I was able to speak with her this week about kind of now that that's wrapping up, kind of her reflections on what that's meant and you know, what she's really kind of prioritized as Interior Secretary and kind of, you know, the legacy of that. And I think she said she's really thought about that and thought about her, you know, her own journey, but also kind of what this means for tribes around the country and kind of having somebody in this position of power.
And Dan, when we look at her accomplishments as Interior Secretary, she ushered in a lot of major initiatives. She launched 59 wind energy projects. She also addressed orphan oil wells and abandoned mines, and also renamed over 600 landmarks with derogatory names. So she kept really, really busy during her tenure.
Yeah, she's been busy. I mean, I think she's juggling kind of different interests in the job as far as, you know, oil development, but also renewable energy projects. And she really has prioritized some of these issues, kind of elevating Native American voices. Another thing she talked about as one of her top achievements was an initiative about Native American boarding homes and that she had a personal connection to the issue, that her grandparents had been sent to one boarding home in Santa Fe and kind of the generational impacts of that. So I think she said she's hoping some of that work continues, but kind of proud of what they've been able to accomplish and really bringing more attention and raising awareness of these past historical issues.
And while her list of achievements has been vast and varied, Dan, she's also faced some challenges and pushback as well. She faced criticism for decisions like limiting gas and oil leasing near Chaco Canyon and handling tribal gaming disputes as well. So there's been some rough waters as well that she's had to navigate.
Yeah, that's right. And she told me, you know, that she's learned and, you know, that you can't make everyone happy in a job like that. You know, the Chaco Canyon was one example where some Navajo Nation landowners were upset about the decision because they received some financial compensation for these drilling leases. Also on the gaming issues with tribes trying to set up casinos off reservation. I think there's been a lot of pride in the Native American community having someone in this position, but it's also been a lot of pressure. And I think, you know, tensions are bound to mount when it gets to some of these issues. And you know, she's acknowledged that, you know, there are decisions she had to make that were unpopular at times.
But Dan, the most interesting part of this story to me is despite Haaland's accomplishments and despite the pushback she got as well, she really hopes she has left behind a legacy of advocacy. She's a Laguna Pueblo member here in New Mexico, and she said that she prioritized ensuring that Native American communities were treated equally and hopes that continues for future generations.
I wanted to make sure that Indian country was on equal footing with everything else that we are charged with doing here. So we really did our, you know, as much work as we could to lift Indian country up, and we're super proud of everything we've been able to do there as well.
Yeah, and I spoke with Regis Pecos, who's a former governor of Coche de Pueblo, and he talked about bringing some high school students to see her, and that, that she took the time to meet with all of them and really talk about these issues. So I think that legacy of even for young people, seeing someone like them in this position is meaningful. I mean, I think she also had to deal with members of Congress who were opposed to parts of her agenda. I mean, so she didn't necessarily have an easy ride on some of these things, but I think she described it to me as at first almost being a little overwhelmed by the position, but now kind of, really proud of her accomplishments.
And as Haaland prepares to return back home to New Mexico, she hinted to you, Dan, that she may have potential political ambitions, possibly even a gubernatorial campaign in 2026. So there's some options for her as she returns here to the land of enchantment.
Yeah, she said for now that she looks forward to returning to New Mexico and is going to keep supporting folks in the Department of the Interior and cheering them on from the sidelines. She didn't say any specifically about, what might come next politically for her, but there has been a lot of chatter about her maybe running for governor. And I think this, the timeline kind of lines up for her to do that. I mean, and we'll see what happens in the coming months. But the current governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, has just under 2 more years left on her term. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear more from Deb Haaland here in the coming months.
So Deb Haaland, a historic tenure as Interior Secretary, and maybe even a possible future governor of New Mexico if she so chooses. Albuquerque Journal-Capitol Bureau Chief Dan Boyd with the latest. Thanks so much, Dan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
A South Carolina man pleaded guilty Friday to gunning down a New Mexico State police officer who stopped to help him with a flat tire earlier this year. With more on this plea deal and the case itself, I'm now joined by Albuquerque Journal reporter Matthew Narvaiz, who is following the story. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Gino.
So Matt, Jeremy Smith pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including carjacking resulting in death, and the plea deal allows him to avoid the death penalty, but he does face life in prison without possibility of parole. But let's backtrack for a little bit. What can you tell us about this case?
So it was about March when Officer Justin Hare pulled over on the side of the road to try to help someone who had a flat tire. That person got out of the car, walked over to Officer Hare's window, and they began to talk about the officer helping him get back to town. Before anything could happen, that man, Jeremy Smith, shot the officer in the head, put him in the passenger seat, drove off with his cruiser, and crashed it before fleeing into the rural area around Tucumcari. Fast forward a couple days in a manhunt, they find him in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they shoot him on the west side after a gas station clerk identifies him during the manhunt. And months later, here we are at a federal court hearing where he is pleading guilty to killing Hare.
And Smith was already on the run from South Carolina before he even got here to New Mexico, correct?
Yeah, so the car he was in when he got that flat belonged to a paramedic in South Carolina who was found dead a day later. Authorities say Smith killed the woman, stole her car, and then took a cross-country trip headed for Albuquerque to visit a former girlfriend.
So despite Smith agreeing to a plea deal here in New Mexico, he still faces the possibility of the death penalty in a case in South Carolina, correct, Matt?
Correct. So the plea deal he was offered here by prosecutors took the death penalty off the table. But the death penalty is still on the table in South Carolina because he faces several charges there that could go federal, and they're capital offenses.
And Officer Hare's family was on hand when the plea deal was announced. What was their reaction?
The Hare family said they were very upset that he was not sentenced to death. That was their wishes.
So, Matt, how did the U.S. Attorney's Office reach the conclusion that they wanted to issue a plea deal and not pursue the death penalty?
So the U.S. Attorney's Office, they look at several factors when they're thinking of a death penalty. And the reasons that they come to the conclusion they come to is confidential, and the reasons why are confidential. But Terry Hare, Justin Hare's mother, said that she was told that one of the reasons that they took the death penalty off the table was because Jeremy Smith had been a special needs student when he was a child.
And Matt, we mentioned earlier in the interview that Smith could still face potential charges in South Carolina, but I would imagine the timing on that is pretty vague at the moment.
It's very vague. He has a sentencing set for sometime after 90 days from now, and then it's up to South Carolina kind of to take the ball from there.
So still a lot of moving parts in this case for Jeremy Smith moving forward. Albuquerque Journal reporter Matthew Narvaiz with the latest. Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
If you like hearing all of the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal here on the Leading News, consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal. You can check our show notes for a discount code on a digital subscription and keep up with all the latest news from New Mexico's leading news source. New Mexico Reentry Center, a nonprofit focused on housing and job placement for formerly incarcerated people, is opening up shop in Española, hoping to reach a whole new community. With more on this move, I'm now joined by Albuquerque Journal business reporter Matthew Narvaiz. Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Gino.
So Matt, New Mexico Reentry Center, we touched on it at the beginning. They help formerly incarcerated people, but I'll allow you to provide our listeners with more insight in exactly how the nonprofit is helping.
Yeah, so, I guess just a little bit about the New Mexico Reentry Center itself. It was founded and is run by Natasha Garcia here in Albuquerque. And basically what this organization does is it helps former inmates find jobs and housing. So, over the past 5 years that they've been around, they've helped hundreds, I believe she said around 600 people total, find jobs and housing here in the city. And they're trying to bring this playbook to Española, which is another, part of the state that is really struggling with addiction and, folks who've been incarcerated. So,
and Matt, they're expanding into Española with $180,000 from a $6.4 million federal grant they received. When did they get the grant and how did they get it?
Yeah, so Garcia's work here in Albuquerque really caught the attention of an organization called the North Central New Mexico Economic Development District. Long name. So they got this federal grant about 3 years ago, $6.4 million, I believe it was. And basically what this grant was meant to do was help folks find jobs in healthcare and construction. And part of what the district wanted to do was, really focus on people who were getting out of jail or prison. And so, Garcia's work, like I said, caught the attention of this district. And so they partnered up, signed a contract here in early January. And they're hoping by the end of the month to really ramp up. Natasha Garcia and the Reentry Center, have already found a space in Española. And right now they're in the process of hiring an intensive case manager to work up there. Making inroads with, the jails, the courts, businesses in those sectors.
And Matt, you just mentioned it right there. The organization is going to have an intensive case manager assisting clients. What are they going to be doing?
Yeah, so not only helping these folks find housing and jobs, but really just helping them get back on their feet. So, helping them attain their driver's licenses if they can get those, their IDs, birth certificates, social security cards, driving them to interviews, just the little things that are really hard for folks who are just getting out of jail or prison. So, really just being that, that hand that lifts them up. That's basically what the job entails.
And Matt, I know they're just planting their roots in Española, but what does the future look like and what kind of impact do they hope to have on this community?
Yeah, so, first off, by even coming to the community and setting up an office and a space there. But, like I had mentioned previously, just really, making connections with the jails and the prisons, parole officers that are up in the area. And a lot of this is done through word of mouth. So just letting the folks up there know that, hey, we're here. We're ready to help. And I should add that, the long-term goal is to not only do this in Española and Albuquerque and the northern part of the state, but across the whole states. That's kind of, what Natasha Garcia and her organization are really looking to do.
So a really cool new nonprofit on its way to Española to help formerly incarcerated individuals. Albuquerque Journal business reporter Matthew Narvaiz with the latest. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it was good to be here.
In other headlines from the newsroom, in 2019, the city of Albuquerque invested over $4 million in rooftop solar panels, aiming to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2025. However, 6 years later, over 1,000 panels placed on downtown buildings remain largely unused due to reduced electricity demand during the COVID-19 pandemic and strict grid requirements. The city plans to activate the panels by 2025, redirecting some to other buildings to address compatibility issues. The Civic Plaza panels remain connected to City Hall, while 300 of the main library's 600 panels could be relocated to facilities like Fire Station Station 9 and the Northwest Multi-Generational Center. These changes aim to prevent wasted capacity, as inactive panels lose up to a third of their 30 to 35-year lifespan. Critics, including City Councilor Dan Lewis, have accused Mayor Tim Keller of failing to deliver on sustainability promises. While city officials highlight progress, with Albuquerque currently sourcing 80% of its energy from renewables, plans to add solar panels to 25 more city buildings are in motion, pending City Council approval. The city is working with the Public Service Company of New Mexico, or P&M, to adjust grid connections and accommodate fluctuating energy needs. P&M has approved the projects, but enforces strict safeguards to maintain downtown grid reliability. By adapting solar setups and expanding installations, officials remain optimistic about meeting Albuquerque's renewable energy goals. The Albuquerque Police Department has reported a nearly 8% decrease in fatal crashes in 2024, with 73 investigated, including 35 pedestrian deaths. Officers issued over 72,000 traffic citations, while speed cameras generated another 140,000. APD made 362 DWI arrests and targeted street racing with 554 citations. The department also recovered 70 stolen vehicles and investigated 563 hit-and-run crashes, clearing nearly half of them. Traffic enforcement remains a key for the department for public safety. And the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office has announced a drone program to assist deputies and firefighters who are responding to calls. These drones aim to improve response times, de-escalate situations, and ensure first responders have the right resources. Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office plans to train 25 deputies to operate up to 20 drones, with full deployment expected in 6 to 8 months. The agency is also asking for $4 million in state funding for the program. Looking for something to do today? Abstract in Albuquerque is happening at the Outpost Performance Space from 2:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. A plant swap is happening at the Lost Cultures Tea Bar from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and karaoke is happening from 8 p.m. to midnight at Bourbon and Boots. Now taking a look at Albuquerque's weather forecast. Today you can expect sunny skies with a high near 42, but tonight mostly clear skies with a low around 6 degrees and wind chill values as low as -5 degrees. An extreme cold watch will be in effect. To keep up with all the latest news from the Albuquerque Journal, you can visit our website at abqjournal.com. For the leading news, I'm Gino Gutierrez.